Okay, today we will be discussing the life and the works of Barbara Stoddard Burks. So, Burks was born on December 22nd, 1902, in New York. Her parents were Jessie and Frances Burks, and they were both educators, and Burks also had one younger sister named Marjorie. And during her childhood, Burks and her family moved around very frequently and lived in New York, and then the Philippines, Philadelphia, Washington, D.C., and California. So after living in the Philippines, the family moved back to America, to Washington, D.C., where Burks graduated from high school at 16 and got her first job at the National Bureau of Standards. The family then moved to California, and Burks started school at the University of California, Berkeley, and she was very interested in psychology and heredity. And in 1923, after her junior year, Burks transferred to Stanford University and studied with Lewis M. Terman, where she did a lot of work with him. She was a research assistant for him for 4 years from 1924 to 1929. And during this time, Burks published multiple articles of their research together with Terman, mainly centering on genetics and children's intelligence development. And then in 1930, Terman and Burks published an article called Genetic Studies of Genius, Volume 3, The Promise of Youth. And then Burks graduated in 1927 with a doctorate degree and started a career as a school psychologist in Pasadena, California. Also in 1927, Burks got married to Herman Ramsberger. Ramsberger also did a lot of research, but in chemistry at Stanford, and then he was also an assistant professor at California Institute of Technology. Unfortunately, only after a few years of marriage, though, Ramsberger was diagnosed with lung cancer and later died in 1932. And then after her husband's death, Burke started working as a research associate at the Institute of Child Welfare at the University of California, Berkeley in 1934. And then also in 1934, Burks was given the General Education Board Fellowship Award. And this awarded her to basically go to Europe where she could do more research. And in Europe, Burks worked with Jean Piaget in Switzerland, and they researched child egocentrism. And this research was presented at the American Psychological Association Convention in 1936. In Europe, Burks also did a lot of other research and got to talk to Carl Jung and Charlotte Boyer. And after leaving Europe, Burks became a research associate at Carnegie Institution of Washington and Long Island, where she worked and studied genetics. And then in 1940, Burks became a research associate at Columbia University, and she started studying about children of alcoholics and their adjustment in foster homes. Again, she was very interested in genetics. And then before completing the research, Barbara Stoddard Burks unfortunately died on May 25th, 1943, at the age of 40. And not much is known completely about her death, but in a New York Times article, it was stated that she either fell or jumped from the George Washington Bridge. And moving on, we are going to discuss Barbara Stoddard Burks' main works. So Burks was very interested in how heredity influenced mental development. And in 1928, Barbara Stoddard Burks published her dissertation. And in this study, Burks looked at 204 foster children in California. And these children were ranging from the ages of 5 to 14. And they were also all adopted before they turned 6 months old. And Burke's method measured the intelligence of the children and also the biological parents. Burks also included a control group of 105 children and their biological parents and measured their intelligence as well. Burks found that foster children and biological children all resembled their parents' intelligence. The resemblance was greater in the control group, so which was the biological children and the biological parents. But in the end, she stated that heredity accounts for 75 to 80%, and environmental factors account for 20 to 25% of variance in intelligence. And then also Burks was very interested in, she was very interested in twins. So with the study in 1949, along with Anne Rowe, they published the study of twins reared apart. And yeah, this was published in 1949. This study basically was a long-term study that interviewed and studied four sets of identical twins who were separated at birth and lived different lives. So the first set of twins were Carla and Doris. The second set were Earl and Frank. And the third set were Gertrude and Helen. And the fourth set were James and Keith. Each set of twin had differing factors in their life, such as the parents' wealth, like the environment they were raised in, whether they had schooling up to a certain age, the parents' type of parenting, whether they were disciplined or like a hands-off approach, multiple different factors. And in the end of this study, Burks concluded that the environment, which is nurture, and genetics, which is nature, both played very significant parts in the similarities and differences of the sets of twins who had been separated at birth. The twins in this study had many similarities despite being raised in different environments, which shows that genetics plays a huge role in traits, temperament, and intellectual abilities. But on the other hand, many of the twins had differed in characteristics or traits because of how they were raised in the environment around them. So some had different health issues because of that differing environment, and some expressed emotions differently based on their level of affections from their respective homes. And then moving on, her impact today is still very relevant in mostly in the nature versus nurture debate. This is still very relevant. People trying to do studies all the time of trying to figure out whether nature or genetics or nurture, which is the environment, play a bigger role in development. So yeah, this is very relevant with behavioral genetics and the studies of child development today.